Okay, I think we will get started. Yes. The goal of today was to talk about the different ways you can purchase the pdfToolbox software. And it's actually a little bit broader than that, because I think what we say for pdfToolbox is also more or less, probably completely true for the PDFA pilot side. So, but we're using pdfToolbox as an example with all the numbers we use and so on. And then there are some use cases at the end, and the question there, it's basically some questions like, if I'm in this position, what should I do? And then an answer to that. If you have any questions, feel free to just speak up. You will have to unmute yourself, because I think, yes, everyone is muted automatically, so you do have to unmute yourself. But feel free to speak up or type something in the chat. I think we can deal with all languages of the people who are present at the moment. So that should be good. I'm not so sure about Francisco, whether you are, whether that would be Spanish or Portuguese. If it's Portuguese, that's going to be a challenge. But we will try to deal with it. So, but let me, before we get started, let's introduce the speakers. And there's two of us today, and I will let Christian introduce himself to start with.
Hi, I'm Christian. Welcome to that webinar. Thank you for your interest in what we're presenting today. I'm Christian Blaise, serving as Director of Professional Services and Support at Four Pees. So basically driving teams that do, on one side for the professional services, all the implementation and analysis of the problems of the clients and finding solutions. And on the other end, the support, where we give, the help and identify if there's a need of training, try to find workarounds or identify maybe bugs. Sometimes it can happen with software, and giving the answers as quick as possible to our support base, which is partly end users and partly resellers.
Cool. And then I think most of you should know me by now.
You're Batman.
I'm Batman, yes. I don't know where I left my car, but it should be around somewhere as well. I'm CTO for Four Pees. That means I do a lot of the same things as Christian does. Yeah, we deal with all the difficult questions, and mostly from a technical point of view. And what is a little bit different today is that we're not only going to talk about the technical stuff, but we're also going to add prices when we talk about things, because that is important at some level. And even though I think we both gladly say that we're not salespeople, we do know the prices pretty well by now. And price is an important parameter if you're going to choose between some of the stuff that we're going to present today. So good. So let's get started. pdfToolbox licenses, and I wanted to start with some of the common concepts, because that is something that that is true for most of the things that we're going to say afterwards, and that are still kind of important. I think, Christian, that this is how we all bought software like 15 years ago, maybe not even that long ago. This was the only way to buy software. You bought it, right? It's a one-time payment. Yeah.
Yes.
This is also true for callas. Callas has this available. There are some software companies that don't do this anymore, interestingly, or make it very difficult. For all the callas products, you can still do this. It's a one-time payment. Your license never expires. But of course, that doesn't mean that you will be able to continue to use it if you keep upgrading your operating system and so on. That is kind of an important thing to mention. And for that, there is a maintenance contract, which is mandatory for all of the server level and above products. But you can also get it for the desktop products, and it's 20% of the purchase price per year. It also enables supports and most importantly updates. So if callas comes out with a 12 point, where are we now? 12.1. If they come out with 12.2, then it is included in the maintenance contract. If they come out with 13, and this is not a product announcement, but if they come out with a new version, that would also be included in the maintenance contract as long as your contract is still valid.
So that means that if you're not on an automation product, like the pdfToolbox desktop, and you don't have a maintenance contract, you only get the dot updates like 12.1, 12.2, or what could happen. But when 13 is out, then you have to buy the upgrade.
Correct. And for the desktop versions, there is also an upgrade price. So if there is a new version that comes out, you can pay an upgrade price. That differs depending on whether you're one version or more versions behind. One, two, or more versions, I should say. And then that doesn't exist on the automation product side. So there, you really need to have a maintenance contract. If you don't, then the question is, how long have you not had a maintenance contract? And we just calculate what the upgrade price is going to be. But that is something that normally we can do, or we do on our side. If you have someone who is in that position, they should get in contact, ask the question, and then we'll calculate what the price would be to get to the latest version. But this is not the only thing that is available. We can also do rental licenses.
New world, the new world of software.
So, well, the new world, but it's a growing number. The percentage of people who are doing this is really growing. What is important here, I believe, I think the things that are listed here are kind of obvious. There is a cost per quarter, and you are invoiced per quarter. But what is important is it's like renting a house. At least in most countries, if you rent a house for 10 years, you pay every month. But at the end of the 10 years, you don't own the house. That's not how it works. That's also how this works. So you rent for a period of time. At the end, you still don't own the software. You have to keep paying a monthly or quarterly amount in order to do that.
And I think this is a really important point, because that is the kind of question that we get all the time about, like, if I stop renting, what does happen? Just like you're losing the software, you cannot use it anymore. So basically, like, Creative Cloud or Office 365. And I think it's an important point to take into account.
Yeah, it's really the house situation. If you stop paying your rent, then someone's going to kick you out. That is the unfortunate truth, and it's the same here. Yeah. What should also be mentioned is that over time, it is more expensive than purchasing. If you would make the calculation over time, so on the one hand, you buy a license and then you pay a maintenance contract every year, and you compare that to renting, over time, renting is going to be more expensive.
Of course.
But of course, the advantage is in the fact that the initial investment is much lower. So if you want to start small, then that's a way to do it. Yeah,
there's also some fiscal advantages, by the way, because for the first, you're investing something, so you're buying, it goes into one line of your budget, where here it's only charges because it's something that you rent. So it goes on the other side of your number. So for some companies, that's much easier. And also sometimes you have some level of agreement of you can buy that, or if if it goes above that, you have to ask your boss or the boss of your boss. And then here it's lower, so you can get access to the technology because you have the agreement to sign the bill basically.
You can put it on a credit card and no one is ever going to notice. Yeah. Last point, neither of these systems is going away. There are no plans to have any of these, either of these systems disappear. So if you want to still buy a license, you will be able to. If you want to rent, you're able to as well.
I have a question. I don't know the answer. I don't know if you have it, David. Probably yes. But is there any upgrade path from one to the other, like you were owning and you want to rent, or you were renting and you want to own, or something like that?
So this is the favorite question of Tom, our CEO, I think. Again, it's the house paradigm. If you rent a house for 10 years and then you decide that you want to buy it, the money you've paid for the rent for those 10 years is typically not subtracted from your from the buying price of the house. Yeah. So no, normally there is no upgrade path. If you want to buy it, you buy it. Of course.
Yeah, so you wait until this is the end of your rental period, and then you
Yeah, just if someone would be in that situation, they should just contact us and we'll look at the individual situation. And of course, we're always willing to work with people and find solutions. But in general, the money you pay into renting will not have a difference on the eventual purchase price of the software. I don't know if there is still anyone who is actively using IBM AIX and Sun Solaris, but as a general concept, I still wanted to mention that as far as callas is concerned, macOS, Windows, Linux, the price is the same. So there is no difference in price between the different platforms. The license itself might be tied to a particular platform. So you might have to get a new license if you want to switch between platforms, but that's something else. But there is no price difference. With the other two, the two dinosaur platforms, there is a price difference. Those are more expensive. And the only reason is that there are very few customers who are still using it. And so the support costs of also making sure the software runs on those platforms is a lot higher, and you see that in the price.
Correct me if I'm wrong, David. You said that the license is tied to a platform, but you can actually change from one platform to another. You just have to ask for like another key, let's say, and you can jump from one to the other. Or it's not
careful. Yes, you can, as long as you have an active maintenance contract.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. If you don't have an active maintenance contract, then you need to talk to us and we'll figure out what happens. But normally you need to have an active maintenance contract in order to do those kinds of things. Yeah, but you can switch, absolutely. And for the desktop products, typically those are only on macOS and Windows, and those licenses typically run on both these days. Yeah? So there, it's not so much of
the same license working on both platforms.
Correct. Okay, so let's get going here. We're going to start with the simplest case and then work our way up. I think that makes sense. Huh? So a regular pdfToolbox license, and of course I'm talking mostly about the automated versions because the desktop versions are much simpler. There you buy a license for each computer that you want to run it on, and that's it, more or less. But on the automation side, there are a lot more options. And that's where it becomes a little bit difficult. So the licenses we are talking about today are the ones for server, CLI, SDK, the automated versions. Typically, there is no difference in price between server, CLI, SDK. So it's up to you what you use. In fact, from a technological point of view, there is very little difference between server and CLI. The SDK is a library version, so that is still something else. But there is no price difference. And the most important point is the fact that these licenses require activation. Activation means tying the license to the machine it is running on, whether it's real or virtual. And it's a manual process, or at least a semi-manual process. And that means that either the software can initiate the activation process and then you'll get an email back, or if you're working for the FBI or the CIA or something like that, I didn't see anyone, but probably you wouldn't see them if they joined. So if you're working for somewhere where there is no internet connection, then you can do it completely offline through email. But in both cases, it is a manual process. And that comes with some restrictions, as you cannot automate the activation of any of these licenses on a machine. And we'll see some of the annoying bits of that later. So 2 flavors, regular and unlimited. In your experience, Christian, do you have many people who have an unlimited license?
I quite a few, but I mean, if I compare it, probably, I don't know, 10 to 15% of the the total amount of the customers I used to have.
Yeah, pdfToolbox is pretty fast, of course.
Yeah.
So the difference between the two is simple. In the one case, it is limited to 8 things in parallel. In the other case, it's unlimited. So it's limited only by the hardware. And let's be honest, it's limited by the hardware in both cases. If you have a machine that only has 4 processors or virtual processing units or whatever you want to call them, then you can't run 8 parallel tasks on there. You need a processor or a core or a virtual processor per task that is going to run in parallel. And probably if you have a 4-core machine, you don't want to run 4 pdfToolbox tasks on it either. You want to give or keep some reserve for the operating system.
Sure.
What's the advantage of the unlimited license? Well, that you can run more things in parallel if your machine is big enough. But the disadvantage is that you will need a quite powerful machine in order to be able to do that. Not only do you need the processors for it, but also, and maybe more importantly, you need enough memory to back that up, and you need you're going to run into issues with file I/O if you have too many things going on at the same time. So you need to have disk access that is fast enough as well.
Yeah, it's a really powerful machine, a huge number of processors, huge size of memory and SSDs, and
also expensive if you go that route. And that is, I think, one of the things that makes this a little bit less of an ideal option these days, is that these machines are expensive, and also if you try to virtualize them, they also tend to be expensive. It's usually cheaper to have a bunch of smaller machines.
But then if you have smaller machines and more pdfToolboxes, you'll have to find a way to distribute the jobs to the different pdfToolbox. But I think that this is something that we're going to touch later on.
Yes, absolutely. So the pricing for this, you can see that we don't do the marketing pricing here. That is on purpose. It took me a long time to get to that point, but at least we are on round numbers. The regular license is 4,000 euro. The unlimited is 6,000. Yeah. So yeah, in the end, you have to decide how much processing power you need, and then if you're going for the unlimited license, make sure that you have at least more than 8 processors in the machine you're going to be running this on, because otherwise there is no point.
Yeah, I think that below 24, that doesn't make sense.
No, probably not. It's a substantial price increase. So yeah. And remember, of course, that we talked about the fact that there is maintenance included in these things. If you buy an unlimited license, obviously the maintenance is also going to be higher on that license. So before we go to the answer to your question, Christian, let's talk about two types of special licenses, because everyone is special and they deserve their own license. So cold spare licenses. What's a cold spare license?
It's cold and it's for spare.
The other term for it is a failover license, yeah. The license agreement for a cold spare license says that you can install it on a server, obviously, and you can activate it and make it ready and so on. But it can only run if the production machine is down. So the idea there is if you want to make sure you always have access to a license, you install a production machine that normally does whatever it needs to do. If that machine, starts a fire, explodes, then you want to be able to switch quickly to something else. Well, that could be that failover license. But the license agreement says that it can only process files if the production machine is down. And so if you're not using the normal license to run production.
Yeah, that's why it's called cold spare, right? That's kind of a restrictive failover, where you could think that failover is also something that could be running and just, capture the stuff. If I want to have like, main production server that is running, and I need another one that I want to be live, because I want probably also to use some time when I have a peak in production or something like that, then I cannot use that, right?
No.
And that would mean that I have to buy another server.
Correct.
And if I buy enough of them, I can get into the volume license model, right?
Yeah, correct. So you need a license per machine. You can only use failover licenses if they are not going to do production unless something fails. And if you buy enough of enough server licenses, then there are price breaks and volume discounts. And I believe, but here is where I use I'm not a commercial card. I believe that starts at 3 licenses. But in doubt, just ask the question. The price of this cold spare license is 25% of the production license itself. So if you want a cold spare for a regular license, that would cost €1,000, because the regular license is €4,000.
And where you have to add the mandatory maintenance on top of that, right?
Correct. In any case, there are very few exceptions. There is only one exception, I think, where there is no maintenance, and we'll talk about that. But in all other cases, you always have to add maintenance, and the maintenance, remember, is 20%. So that would be an additional 200. I'm calculating quickly, an additional €200 on the price of this license. I should also say that maintenance is only required the first year. So when you purchase this license, you have to purchase maintenance. The second year, you could decide not to renew it. I don't think that would be smart, but technically you can, and we will allow you to do so. Why do I say that? I don't think technically that is smart, because if you look at what Callas adds every year to the product, both in just improvements to the functionality that is already there and in a new functionality that you can take advantage of, then I've seen very few cases where it doesn't make sense to continue the maintenance contract and then get the upgrades.
And I just want to add, it's probably obvious, but you never know, that it wouldn't make sense to pay the maintenance on the production license and stop paying it for the cold spare, because then you cannot upgrade it. And the cold spare needs to have the same configuration than the other one, because if not, there's absolutely no sense of having one.
No, absolutely. Yeah, so that's the first type of special license. And then there is a second one, which is also a pretty self-explanatory, but not everyone knows that it exists. So it's kind of important to mention it as well. And that is a development license. And a development license can be used in any environment that is not a production environment. So it can never be used to run production jobs. But if you have a customer who has a development environment, a staging environment, and a production environment, both for development and staging, you could run a dev license because they are not production.
And this is definitely very interesting when you have, like, if you're in a big organization and you have a production that is really critical, that,
Yes.
I don't know, there's a new version of pdfToolbox that is out and you want to put that into a staging environment so you can test that everything is running fine before pushing that to the production. That is really, really useful.
Yeah. And here it should also be said that maybe you don't want to follow the production environment completely. If you buy an unlimited license for the production environment, for example, then there is no sense in buying an unlimited development license. That doesn't really make sense.
It's weird.
You're not going to be doing production with that license. And the price is, again, 25% of the production license. You'll see that the numbers are all quite easy, and that is by design. We really try to keep it understandable for people as well. Both for failover and development, normally you cannot buy those licenses unless you already have a production license. For development, there are sometimes exceptions because it could make sense in a startup phase to begin with a dev license and only buy the production license when you're ready to start doing production. But for failover, that's a hard requirement. You can only have a failover license if you already have a production license that it is going to be a failover for. That kind of makes sense, I think.
Yep.
And then my favorite. There is also something called ASP license. Now, I will say what I say about it on this slide, but be aware that that might very well change in the future. Because this is a very difficult concept sometimes, and it's not always clear to know where the line is sometimes. Here as well, just ask the question if you have questions about it. But the ASP license is to be used, and this is the official definition, which is difficult. It's only to be used in cases where the processed PDF files are used outside of the organization using pdfToolbox. A very easy example is a preflight service. Yeah, I set up a website. I give people the right to upload a PDF file to my website. The website uses pdfToolbox to preflight to verify whether it's PDFX, for example, and then it gives the response to the user that this is PDFX or not, and it gives a corrected file to the user with the PDFX file. To do this, you can do this, this is not a problem, but in order to do this, you need an ASP license. And as you can see, the ASP license is significantly more expensive than regular licenses.
So if I follow what you're saying, David, it is really about the resulting file of the preflight that makes the difference. So like, if I have a portal where I ask people to upload files and I pre-flight them and I give them a report saying the file is bad and you have to do something and you have to provide another one, it's not the ASP use case. But if I get that file, I make correction and I send the file back to them, then it's ASP.
So that's where it starts.
Complex than that.
That's where it starts being
I know.
a fine line. And that is also why we're kind of looking at, isn't there another way to deal with this? It is already the case that if you go to one of the newer licensing methods that we will talk about in a second, license server, that the ASP concept doesn't exist there anymore. If you go for license server, you don't have to worry about this part anymore.
Okay, easier.
Much better. So if you have questions about this, just again get in contact, and we will give you advice on where you are. And now we're getting to your question, Christian. And the question was, well, what if I don't want to buy a very big server, but I still have too much volume for one computer? How do I deal with that? And there are two ways to answer that. And this is kind of the oldest way, if you want. This has existed for quite a while. And then after that, we'll discuss the more modern solution. I shouldn't really put it that way because they both have their own advantages and disadvantages, but you'll see that. So this is the dispatcher satellite system. This is built into pdfToolbox, so you don't really have to do much in order to start using this. You can enable it in the server, you can use it in the CLI and so on. It's built into the software. And what is it? Well, on the one hand, you have a dispatcher. And this is a piece of software that, in fact, this is just pdfToolbox server or CLI that you installed somewhere. And you activate it with a dispatcher license, and then you get a dispatcher. And the dispatcher is a traffic cop. It does no work. I don't want to imply that traffic cops do no work, but they don't process files. So this license doesn't process any files. It just looks at the work that comes in, and it distributes the work across multiple satellites. Yeah? The satellite gets a task from the dispatcher, it does it, and then it returns the result to the dispatcher. This is how it works. And so in order to make this useful, you would need at least the configuration that I have on screen here, one dispatcher and then two satellites. If you do less than that, it becomes kind of silly in most cases. Of course, you could run one satellite in this setup. You could run one satellite on the same machine as the dispatcher. The dispatcher isn't doing any work, so it's not going to have a very high burden on the machine. And that means that you can run a satellite on the same machine as the dispatcher if you want to. Maybe also interesting, satellites can run on different operating systems. Again, the satellite is just pdfToolbox server or CLI, but then activated with a dispatcher license, which is actually the same as a normal license. So you can run them on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and you can also tag them to say, this is that kind of satellite. And that means that if you're processing jobs, you could give a job to the dispatcher and say, I want this to be processed on a satellite that is tagged as Windows. Why? Well, maybe because most of the stuff that you're doing is pre-flight, and there it doesn't matter on which platform it is done, but you also get some Word documents and you want to convert them to PDF, and that you want to happen on a Windows machine. Yeah? So you install one satellite on Windows, the rest on Linux, and when Office documents come in, you tell the dispatcher that this job should be handled on a Windows client. And then that job will go to one of the satellites that is tagged with the Windows tag. That's one example of doing that.
Is the dispatcher working like as a load balancer, or also is looking at what are the servers that are available and what are the servers that are running?
Yes. It will distribute the jobs to the satellites that are available. And what is also cool is that you don't, it's really easy to add a satellite. So if I have this kind of setup and I outgrow it, I get more work, I could buy an additional pdfToolbox license, install it on a machine, and then just start it and register it with that dispatcher. And the result would be that all of a sudden my dispatcher now has 3 satellites instead of 2 satellites. And it will start using that third one as well.
And you don't have to change anything in a dispatcher. I mean, the same dispatcher can serve like 2 servers or 10 or 20. It's the same dispatcher, the same license.
It is when you launch the satellite that you register it with a dispatcher, and from that point on, the dispatcher knows about them, and it will check where there is free space. Of course, the more the more satellites you have, the more network traffic you're also going to have with that machine. So network becomes an important issue as well in those environments. But this does not change the basic thing that we said in the beginning. So it's not a complete answer to your question, perhaps yet. The dispatcher and satellites must still be activated. Yeah? You still buy a normal license, and you will need to install that license and activate it on a particular machine. Yeah. Which is still a manual process.
So I'm sure we have better.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Otherwise, we would have told the story differently. But pricing first. So the dispatcher is always the same price. It is half of a normal license, so 2,000 euro. And then a satellite is, in fact, I say 4,000 here, but that is not necessarily the case even. A satellite is, in fact, a regular pdfToolbox server license. So you could have a satellite that costs 4,000 euro, and then you get one with 8 parallel processes. You could also buy a satellite license for 6,000 euro, then it would be unlimited, and install it on a larger machine. So these two things can still be combined if you want. But so minimum cost for this setup, I always like to think about that. Like I said, kind of the minimum environment is this. The cost for that, well, dispatcher at 2,000, 2 times satellite at 4,000. So we're talking about 10,000 euro with a 20% maintenance, which would be 2,000 euros if I calculate that.
We have really easy numbers today.
Yeah, it used to be 3,999 and then 1,999, and then everyone goes crazy.
Yeah, if you have to calculate 20% just live, like here,
no.
Thank you.
No. So kind of the minimum amount, like I said, is going to be 10,000 euro if you want to go for dispatcher and satellite. The big advantage is that you can start with regular licenses. If you want, you can upgrade it to an unlimited license, or you could say, oh, I'm going to upgrade it to multiple machines and then go in the direction of dispatcher satellite. The licenses that you already bought are not lost. They are just used in that dispatcher satellite concept. So it's a quite easy upgrade. And then this is the answer, I think, to your question. License server. Very abstract and not saying much diagram perhaps, but what is important is that on the left-hand side, there is a license server cluster in this case. So I have 3 machines and each of them has a license server on it. On the right-hand side, I have some machines running pdfToolbox. License server is a separate application. So if you go on the callas website, you'll see pdfToolbox and pdfAPilot and pdfChip, and you'll also see an application called license server. That you install somewhere. The most easy way of doing it is that you install one license server, you activate the license server, which is still this manual process. And then you install pdfToolbox on some other machines, and those you don't have to activate. And that is the big difference. So pdfToolbox would, in this scenario, not be activated. You would simply point pdfToolbox to your license server, and it is the license server that decides whether pdfToolbox is allowed to process a file or not. Make sense?
Yeah. So just to be clear, this is completely different than the dispatcher. It's not like the license server is pushing the job to the callas system. It's just like you have many callas's and they are calling the license server to see if they're granted to work or not.
Correct. And it's really that different. So for the dispatcher and satellites, you would communicate, your integration would be with the dispatcher, and the dispatcher would separate the work out to whatever satellite is free. With the license server, you have to communicate with a pdfToolbox server somewhere. And pdfToolbox, once it gets a job, is going to communicate with the license server to know whether it is allowed to do what you're asking or not.
Okay, so when you say, like, you have kind of a flexibility because you don't have to activate the pdfToolbox, so you can just, like, I would say, if you're in the cloud, it's easy. You can shoot a new one very easily, like if it's a Docker container or something like that. But then afterwards, it's in your call to let's say the process that has to do. You have to call that new one. It's not just shooting a new one. It's there, but you have to ask him to do something.
You have to do the distribution of the jobs and the queuing of the jobs. And this is very important and something that is often forgotten as a complexity. But the license server is not a task manager. It's not a queuing system. That is not the idea. It simply says yes or no to the question, can I process this file to pdfToolbox? In your solution, you are going to need some kind of queue manager, task manager to pick up the jobs that come in, decide what happens with them, and then pass them on to a particular pdfToolbox. And the load sharing, so figuring out which of these servers is free and where am I going to send it now, that is also something that you have to do. That is important because that is not an unimportant complexity of what the whole solution needs to do. Although in most environments, things like queue managers and task managers that exists, and you can use one that exists in many cases. People have invented that, and in many cases, even if you're working in Node.js, for example, you have free implementations of things that are really complex and can support a lot of stuff, but you need to take that into account and do something like that.
Okay, but if, you know, I'm a person, I'm not really technical, I don't have any IT department inside, and I have something like that because this is my need for my use case. So what can I do? Find
an expert.
Oh,
but seriously, I think so, because if you want to go the path of license server, you're not only going to run into the problem of having a queue manager or a task manager, but you're also going to have to deal with probably running these things in the cloud or in a Docker environment. And you're going to want to automatically spin up servers if the need is there, and then take them down again if you no longer need them, and so on and so on. You cannot implement this without a technical resource. So either this is something that you have in your company, or you will need to find someone externally that can help you with setting that up. Absolutely.
And you have no idea of, like, isn't Four Pees providing something like that? Thinking of it?
We would also, of course, we could help with that as well. We have done implementations in that sense, and we're actually working on a Node.js based pdfToolbox API implementation that that has that internally, because you need it. If you build something like that, you need a queue manager, a task manager, or whatever. So again, same, if you have questions about that, check out what exists, but you will need to find a technical expert to help you. There are We have done that. We have experience with it. We have other partners who have done that and have experience with it. And we will be more than happy to point you to some of these partners as well and tell you what they're good at and not good at, or where their API that they're building is going. The resources exist, but you will need someone who can help you set this all up, I think. This is not a really easy solution. It's easy on the license server side. You just need to follow the help and then you can activate them easily, and you can, that is all quite easy to do. But the rest of the architecture you need around that is more challenging.
Thanks.
I don't want to scare people, but it is more.
It's more demanding.
So the second question, of course, is why would you have more than one license server? And the answer is, well, if you have 20 PDF toolboxes that are running somewhere and you have one license server and that machine with your license server blows up, then none of the others are still going to be able to do anything, because now there is no one to tell them that they have a right to process files. So that license server, if you only have one, becomes the bottleneck of the whole solution. That's the one point of failure, single point of failure. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
And in order to overcome that, the license server can be installed in a cluster. That doesn't make a difference for price. We'll get to pricing in a second, but the number of license servers that you install doesn't make a difference. But you can choose to install 3 instead of 1, or maybe 5 instead of 1. As long as it's an odd number, you can do it. It doesn't make sense to install 27 license servers, obviously, but.
Yeah, and I guess that you can install that into a virtual machine, but obviously you shouldn't do that on the same physical machine.
Yes, so that is one thing, but you also need to be careful with where you install it, because the license server needs to be on a permanent machine, and because it needs to be always on, yeah, and it needs to be activated. So you need to be able to activate it on that machine. And of course, you don't want to do it in an environment where if someone changes something, that then the license or the activation is going to disappear. That is not what you want.
Yeah.
On PDF Toolbox, there is no such restriction anymore. So you can run PDF Toolbox in a temporary Docker environment. That doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be activated, so you can do whatever you want. But the license server itself, or license servers, need to be run on permanent machines. And when you install them, you will need to set them up as a cluster. So they need to know of each other. If you install cartridges, what are those? Well, we'll get there in a second. If you install them, then they will share them amongst each others without you having to do anything. So they act as a cluster. And if you have 3 license servers and one blows up, then the other 2 will happily continue until you have had a chance to replace the 3rd machine.
And they don't talk to each other. So when you do your call in PDF Toolbox, you have to call all of the license servers that you have in your cluster. So one of them can answer, right?
Yeah, so it is, normally you will pass the IP address or the network name of all license servers. But PDF Toolbox is just going to connect to the first one that it can connect to. Yeah? And if it can connect to one, then the rest is ignored. It just needs to get an answer from someone. But of course, you need to pass all of them on your command line call, for example, because yeah, if license server number 1 blows up, then it's not going to answer. And then PDF Toolbox is going to try with one of the other ones.
Okay.
If you have 3 license servers and you lose 2, then you're out of luck. Then it's going to stop again.
Yeah, that's why you propose to have 5.
Yeah. So the risk is it's a risk analysis thing. If you have 5 license servers, the risk is lower because you can lose 2 out of the 5 before you have an issue. Yeah. With 3 license servers, you can only lose 1. But what makes the most sense is either 1, for example, in dev environments, or 3 in production environments. Those are the things that make the most sense. But any odd number will work.
Yeah.
So how does this work from a licensing point of view? Well, what happens is that once you have the license server installed, you can install cartridges in there. That's how we call them, is cartridges. Yeah. Think of your printer in a way. If you don't put an inked cartridge in your printer, it doesn't print very well. And there are two types of cartridges. There is a process cartridge and there is a credit cartridge. They are completely different. They can be combined, and we can give some examples of how to do that as well, but they are completely different. A process cartridge is a permanent thing. That means you install it once, it stays on that license server. It never goes away. It's never modified. And you can buy it with a particular number of parallel processes inside. So I can buy a cartridge with 4 processes. And what that does is it permits 4 simultaneous processes. Yeah? So if I start pdfToolbox and I ask it to process something, pdfToolbox is going to connect to the license server. The license server is going to see how many things are running already. If the answer is less than 4, then it's going to say, sure, go ahead. If the answer is 4, or well, it can't be higher. If the answer is 4, then it's going to say, no. This one, not with this cartridge, that doesn't work. So you buy a cartridge, you install that on the license server, and from that point on, you have the right to run X number of simultaneous processes. And then the other type of cartridge is a credit cartridge, and this really is like ink in your printer. That's a consumable. And that means that you install it, it permits X seconds of processing. So each time you run pdfToolbox and you give it a file and a task to do, pdfToolbox will talk to the license server, and the license server will say, sure, I have a credit cartridge you can use. And then pdfToolbox will do its processing. At the end, pdfToolbox will tell the license server how long it took to process that file. And that amount of seconds, 1 credit equals 1 second, that amount of seconds is subtracted from the remaining number of credits in the credit cartridge.
So in that case, it doesn't matter how many pdfToolboxes you have. Basically, you can have 1, 10, 100. It's just like it's consumed the seconds. So to continue on the parallel with the printer, at some point you are going to be out of seconds, like being out of ink. So how can you ensure, I mean, is there a way to monitor that and to be sure that a file is coming and then you have enough seconds to process it?
Yeah, so the license server offers an interface. The license server itself is just a command line application that you launch somewhere, but it offers a web interface that you can serve to from a different machine. And that will show you the overview of the license server, what is happening on it, what are the cartridges that are in there, and so on. But there is also a real a REST API that you can call. So no user interface, but the stuff that makes different applications talk to each other. There is a REST API that you can call, and that will also give you the same information. And you could query that and see how much do I have left? Yeah, so in your process, you could build a small monitoring part that keeps an eye on how many credits are still available. And when they run low, well, you'll, just like ink, you'll have to buy more.
Buy more. And you said that you can combine those two. It's not like you have to go on process and you have to go on credit.
No. I wasn't sure whether I had a slide for that, but I don't think so. But so you can combine them, of course. First of all, the license server is not linked specifically to pdfToolbox. Yeah? You can install a license server and it can license pdfToolbox, but also pdfAPilot and pdfChip as well. So that's one thing. The second thing is that you can install and use these cartridges at the same time, and very often that is the best way of doing it. Why? Well, assume that I have an environment where I have a certain workload, yeah, average workload. You could cover that with a process cartridge with X parallel processes in it. And then for any peak production, you also install a credit cartridge, and the credits would be used to handle the peak that you're getting. That from an economical point of view, that is very often also the best way of doing it. You can't choose which cartridge is used, but pdfToolbox will automatically, or no, I should say the license server will always check whether you have a process cartridge that can still be used first. And only if there is no process cartridge available for what you ask, then it will see if there is a credit cartridge and use that. So as long as you have enough processes in the setup, the credits are not going to be used. They are only for those cases when all your parallel processes are already being used.
Nice.
Price. Let's be very upfront here. This is the most expensive solution of what you've seen so far. And that is just the case. And if you do the calculation, a solution that involves license server is more than likely going to be more expensive than another solution. At the same time, it also offers you things that you cannot do with any of the other license models. So you have to choose which direction you go. The pricing consists of the same two parts as what we talked about technically. You have a license server, which is €4,000. Like I said, it's not dependent of the number of license servers in the cluster. So if you want to install 5 of them, it's still €4,000 and you can install 5 license servers with that. And it includes desktop licenses as well, 5 to be exact. And you can choose what they should be, whether they should be pdfToolbox licenses or PDFA pilot licenses. But given that we're talking about pdfToolbox here the whole time, you get 5 pdfToolbox desktop licenses. And in effect, that corresponds to 5 floating desktop licenses.
So when I read that, then because you were really talking about the automation part of pdfToolbox, so that means that you can use a license server to only serve desktop licenses. Yes. Like I have, I don't know, I have somewhere where I have, I don't know, 20 machines or 20 users in my area, and I can like say, oh, I'm only buying 12 of floating desktop licenses served by a license server. I could do that with desktop.
Yeah, and it's going to work on the same principle. If you have 12 floating licenses and you have 200 users, then as long as only 12 are using the software at the same time, you're okay. But number 13, unlucky number 13, number 13 is going to get the message that we've run out of licenses. Yeah, so it's really a floating license.
And you cannot get credit operators.
No. No. So, but in many environments, this could actually make sense. Also, if you are in a school environment, for example, it could make sense as well. And there are some other cases where this makes sense. But so 5 licenses are always included. In the standard license, by the way, I assume that everyone knows that, but if you buy a regular pdfToolbox server or CLI license, then there is always 1 desktop license included. For the license server, it's 5.
And I guess that you can have a mix of Mac and Windows because it is the same license for, it's a platform in that.
Doesn't matter at all. Doesn't matter at all. And then for the cartridges, because the license server by itself, of course, is nice. You can install that, and then you have the 5 desktop licenses, but that's as far as it goes. If you want to do anything with the automated versions, you will have to install cartridges. Each process in a process cartridge costs €1,000, and you have a yearly SMA on that. and I was smart and calculated it this time, so I don't have to invent it on the fly. Yeah, so each process costs €1,000. So if you want 4 parallel processes in a license server setup, that would be 4,000 for the license server and 4,000 for the 4 parallel processes. And then the credit cartridge come in different sizes. I've listed 2 here, but in actuality, you could talk to us and we can sell you almost anything in terms of cartridges with credits. But each of these has a number of seconds inside, seconds of processing time, and they correspond to a certain euro amount. Yeah. And there is no SMA on this because this is a consumable. Yeah? So you don't need to buy SMA on the credit cartridge, only on the process cartridge and on the license server itself, obviously. So I think we're almost done. We just have at the end of this presentation, we have like 5 questions, I think, on real use cases. Like, this is what I want to do, and how would I do this? And the first one is normal processing, and that's kind of the obvious one, probably. If you want to keep it simple, well, then you buy a regular license or a rental license, for example. Both options, and you can see the pricing of both options. If you buy it the first year, it will be 4,800. Remember, 4,000 plus 20% of 4,000 SMA is 4,800. And then each next year, if you decide to keep the maintenance contract active, which you should, it's going to be €800. That is slightly different for the rental. The rental, there is a quarterly price. In fact, there is a monthly price, but we always invoice per quarter because otherwise it doesn't make sense from an administrative point of view. And the first year you pay €600 per quarter, and all following years you pay €600 per quarter. The rental price includes everything, so the SMA is included in there as well, so there is no difference between the first year and subsequent years. And then you could calculate what that means, and I think you will see that somewhere between year 2 and 3, probably, buying it will become economically smarter, if you want. Except for what you said, there are also tax repercussions, and you don't have the upfront investment, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
That makes sense to me. The others, they're muted and they don't want to talk, so we don't know.
Oh, well.
I guess it makes sense.
So what do I do if I have one big server? Everyone should.
You buy a bigger configuration, right?
Well,
it depends. If you need to process a lot of files, that's not only the big server. It's do you have the need of big number of files.
And this is why I also listed it like this, because it's not because you have, like you said, it's not because you have a big server that you have the volume necessarily to need an unlimited license. Normally, what we tell people is install a regular license, see what happens, tests. You might be surprised to see how quick pdfToolbox is. I will not say unpleasant things about other software, but pdfToolbox is really quite fast in the things it does.
And stable.
And stable. So test that first. And then if at some point you decide that you want the unlimited, then you can always upgrade from the regular to the unlimited. When you upgrade, there will be an additional cost, €2,000, which is the difference between the two. And then there will be a repercussion on your maintenance amount as well. But just, again, get in contact if that happens. It is possible to upgrade. It's not very difficult. And we'll tell you exactly how much it's going to cost you if you are in that situation. I want to auto scale. That's not a scale to put cars on, but the automatic scaling of servers, right? I don't know whether this is the right term, but so what do I need to auto scale?
If I followed what you said before, I think that the license server is the only option that you have, right?
Yeah, really the only option is license server. Everything else is very, very difficult because of this activation process. Yeah. You can look at other solutions if you want, but if it's really auto scaling that you want and not just running a number of pdfToolbox servers in an AWS cloud or something like that, for example, if you know what the amount of licenses that you want and you're not going to auto scale, then it's different. But if you want this automatic scaling of performance, then you need license server.
So here you're really talking about like someone that has a web to print solution and, you know, just before Christmas or Mother's Day, they get a lot of orders, they get a lot of pre-flight, and then they have a huge peak and they need to have something that can respond to that without having to have a very, very big configuration that can serve this, and that is almost not working for the rest of the year. Correct. So here you really like have the same, it's as powerful as your need at that moment.
And the difficulty is also what you're just saying. The difficulty is that you will need to decide how many parallel processes, so what your baseline processing capacity is, and then what you do for credits on top of that. The difficulty is finding that balance. And we've gone through that exercise a number of times with customers now. It always remains difficult. You have to do some testing again and some performance testing and see what happens. The only good thing is that you can install multiple cartridges in a license server, and you can always add cartridges to a license server as well. So if at some point, if you keep track of what happens and you see that it would be better to add 2 more processes in order to find the right balance, then you can just do that. You buy an additional cartridge with 2 processes inside, you install it on license server, and you're done. Yeah. So it can be tweaked, but it's an exercise to go through, unfortunately. And no price here, because obviously the price depends highly on what you do in terms of cartridges. Interesting one. What do you do if you don't want to spend too much money? Well, not too much, as less as possible. So you're a startup and you don't have much funds, and you don't have much capacity yet either. So how do you start as small as possible with pdfToolbox?
I think that probably renting a regular license would make it, because it's where you pay the less. But if afterwards you have some, if it's started,
definitely what I would look at. If you rent a license, that's going to bring your investment to 600 euro per quarter. And that still gives you a full pdfToolbox regular license, so 8 parallel processes. That means you can process quite a few files with that thing. But it costs you only 600 euro per quarter. So in the long run, it is more expensive. That's what we said. After a year, I think 2.5 to 3, it starts getting more expensive. But if you want to start small and have as little costs as possible initially, then this is a good way of doing it.
But the thing is, what we have on top, it's something that cannot evolve. It's basically at some point you have to get rid of that and go to somewhere else. Right. Where what I see at the bottom, and I didn't thought of that, is here you have something that looks, and it is more expensive than the one that we have above. But you already have the infrastructure to make it grow as easy as possible, right?
Yes, and so there is a fixed investment for that of around 5,000 euro for the license server itself. Yeah, but then after that, any use of that solution is based on the number of seconds of processing time. So if for the first 9 months you process very few files, well, you will have a very small cost because only the time that pdfToolbox is being used is going to be subtracted from your credit cartridge.
Yeah.
So it's not an obvious choice, but I did want to add it because I think in some situations this might actually make sense.
Yeah, because what I like here is basically when you start, you never know what is the amount of file you're going to get, because it's your business model, you know, correctly set up and your concept. And so, okay, at first you don't pay very much if that doesn't, you know, ramp up very quickly. And if at some point you have to pay quite a lot of money for that, it's because you are doing quite a lot of business. So this is really, you know, going at the same rate than what you're selling, basically.
Yeah. I think if you're in that situation, it is something to consider. Which of those ways you go is then finally up to you. And actually, I could also have added in the middle that you can just buy a regular license as well, which would come to 4,800, and that's it. So you can do that as well if you want. But there are some options that make sense depending on the situation that you're in.
So just people have to come to us and explain what they're doing, and we can find the best solution for that.
If you have questions, just get in contact and then ask the question, and we will be more than happy to work with you. I think that's the advantage of working with so many customers. We've seen most of these scenarios before, and usually it's quite easy to guide people in the direction that is going to be best for them. And best really means from a technical point of view and from a commercial point of view as well. I think both are important, and we try to be brutally honest on both sides.
Yeah.
I think that's it. So if anybody has any questions, then now would be a good time. I actually expect that most people have melted into a puddle by now, but if there is someone who is in a colder part of Europe who still has questions, then feel free.
There is nothing in the chat, but like you can unmute yourself and ask questions if you have anything to ask.
Good. Then I will let this one play. And I think that's it. Thank you very much for joining us during this hot summer afternoon. Is it officially summer yet? Not yet, I think. Yeah?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Next week.
So anyway, thank you for joining us in this hot spring afternoon. I would say it's after 5, go have a beer or something in the garden and enjoy that. If you have any questions afterwards, or you want to talk about your specific situation regarding licensing, then just get in contact. info@fourpees.com, support@fourpees.com, or Christian and my email address. Anything you want to send it to, we talk to each other and we'll get you an answer. Thanks very much, and see you in a next Four Pees Café.